The storm had been brewing for days on the edge of the Andromeda frontier, a swirling veil of charged particles drifting across the desolate plains like a living thing searching for something to consume. And Arin Hale thought nothing of it as he moved through the dim interior of his outpost, checking monitors, adjusting calibrations, pretending the silence didn't gnaw at him the way it always did after sunset. The isolation was a punishment he believed he deserved, self-imposed exile after the mission that had taken his team. Men and women whose names still scraped across his conscience whenever the station grew too quiet. Out here, buried in dust and loneliness, he didn't have to see the faces of those he failed or hear the whispers of blame, imagined or not. He breathed easier with no one around, or at least he told himself he did, until the sky cracked open with a sound like a dying star, and the sensor screamed an alert he had never heard before. He rushed to the viewport just in time to see a streak of burning metal tearing through the atmosphere, spiraling violently before crashing into the far ridge in a plume of fire and shattered rock. His heart lurched, instinct overpowering caution, and he grabbed his gear, sealing his suit as he stepped into the choking wind. The trek across the barren terrain was brutal, the storm clawing at him, electricity buzzing through the ground with every step. But he pushed forward until he found the wreckage, a torn metallic structure half buried in the red dirt, glowing with residual energy. And then he saw her. She lay collapsed beside the shattered hull, her body a sculpted form of iridescent armor and pale, shimmering skin, her chest rising in shallow, pained breaths. Her limbs were long and elegant, built for combat. Her markings were unmistakable. Vexari, one of the Dominion's elite warriors. Arin froze, instinct shouting retreat, because the Vexari were rumored to tear humans apart for sport. But something in the way she struggled to push herself up, refusing to collapse even as blood trickled down her side, struck a chord deep inside him. She met his gaze with eyes that shimmered like fractured amethyst, fierce yet trembling with exhaustion, and for a moment the storm quieted around them. Then she lost her balance, and Arin acted without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. Her skin was warm, fevered, and she flinched at his touch as if no one had ever reached for her with care. He carried her back to the outpost, every step fueled by a determination he thought he'd lost with his team. And when he laid her on the medical slab and removed parts of her cracked armor, he saw the extent of her wounds: shrapnel, burns, a deep plasma gouge across her ribs. As he worked to stabilize her, she watched him with unfocused suspicion that slowly shifted into something else, something uncertain and searching. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough but melodic, laced with pain and disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" Arin didn't have an answer he could put into words. He only knew that, for the first time in years, reaching out felt like the right thing to do. "Because you're hurt," he murmured, and the softness in his tone made her inhale sharply, as if no one had ever spoken to her that way. Hours later, when consciousness returned fully, she sat upright with warrior rigidity, her gaze sharp, assessing everything around her. "I am Kyra Velix," she said, each syllable carrying authority. "I was exiled for refusing an order. If they find me here, they will kill you for aiding me." Arin met her warning with a calm steadiness she wasn't prepared for. Guilt had hollowed him, but compassion had not died in him. "Then I suppose," he said quietly, "we both know what it's like to lose everything." For the first time in her life, Kyra felt something she didn't have a word for: gentleness radiating from another, being like warmth in a frozen wasteland, and she sensed instinctively that this human was far more. The storm that rolled across the frontier the next morning felt different, charged, restless, as if the world itself sensed the shift blooming between Arin and Kyra, and though neither spoke of the night before, something unspoken threaded the space between them. A tether of trust, fragile enough to snap, yet strong enough to pull them inexorably closer. Their routines changed subtly. Kyra lingered near Arin during repairs, her movements less guarded, her gaze drifting to him with a curiosity she no longer tried to conceal. Arin, in turn, found himself attuned to her presence, noticing the faint glow of her markings when she laughed, rare but breathtaking, or the way she tilted her head slightly when she studied him, as though memorizing every detail for reasons she didn't yet understand. But the fragile peace shattered abruptly that afternoon when a shrill alarm pierced the outpost, the air thickening with the dread signal Arin had hoped never to hear again. He rushed to the console, Kyra close at his heels, and the screen flickered with an unmistakable signature, a Vexari hunter vessel dropping out of warp, its scanners sweeping the sector with predatory precision. Kyra's breath hitched, a rare crack in her warrior compose. She had known they would come, but not this quickly, and not with such calculated purpose. "They've locked on to my former trajectory," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "They will search every outpost until they find me." Arin's stomach twisted as the reality settled over them like a storm cloud. His sanctuary was no longer hidden, no longer safe in Kyra's presence. Once a secret shared only by two isolated souls had become a beacon of danger. Still, he forced calm into his voice as he activated shielding protocols and dimmed external heat signatures. "We have time," he murmured, though he wasn't sure it was true. Kyra watched him work, her expression unreadable, her eyes swirling with a mixture of fear, guilt, and something more complicated, something that a Vexari warrior should not feel. When the outpost trembled from the first pass of the hunter ship's scanners, she stepped back, clutching the edge of a table as memories surged unbidden. The Dominion Academy. The instructors teaching emotionlessness as survival. The day she refused to slaughter, unarmed, colonists and felt her connection to the collective severed like a blade through bone. She had been alone ever since, until this human with soft eyes and haunted hands had pulled her from fire and treated her not as soldier or threat, but as someone worth saving. Arin noticed the distant look in her gaze and placed a gentle hand on her forearm. "Kyra," he said softly, drawing her back from whatever abyss she hovered over. "You're not facing them alone this time." The words hit her harder than the tremor of the next scanner pulse, and she turned toward him with an intensity that stole his breath. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "My people don't merely hunt traitors, they erase them, and anyone who stands beside them." Her markings dimmed, as if absorbing her dread. "If they sense even a trace of emotional impurity, they will tear this place apart." Arin stepped closer until their breaths mingled in the charged air. "Then we make sure they don't find anything." For a long moment, she simply stared at him, wrestling with instincts drilled into her since childhood, the command to sever connection, to run, to never trust anything soft. Yet Arin's steady presence stripped those walls away with disarming ease. "Why do you care?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not your species. I'm not your fight." He met her gaze with quiet certainty, the storm outside reflected in his eyes. "You became my fight the moment you fell from the sky." Kyra's breath caught, her fingers curling involuntarily, as if reaching for something she didn't know how to hold. And for the first time in her life, the certainty she'd always worn like armor faltered, not from fear of death, but from the terrifying realization that this human, with all his guilt and gentleness, had begun to matter more than her own survival. Before she could respond, the console chimed sharply. The hunter vessel was descending, preparing for ground search. Kyra stiffened, every muscle primed for battle, but Arin placed himself between her and the viewport with a calm that defied reason. "We'll face them," he said, his voice steady even as the storm intensified. "But we do it together." And in that moment, amid sirens, shadows, and the oncoming thunder of an empire, Kyra understood that whatever boundary once separated her world from his had already begun to crack, and the fate of both their lives now hinged on a bond neither fully understood, but both were powerless to break. The hunter vessel descended like a blade through fog, its engines vibrating the very ground beneath the outpost. And as Arin killed the interior lights and activated the last of the improvised shielding, Kyra stood in the center of the dim room with her fists clenched and her breath unsteady, a warrior caught between instinct and something far more fragile. She could not stop shaking, not from fear of the hunters. She had faced their ranks 100 times without flinching, but from the unbearable truth taking shape inside her, a truth she had no training to fight. Arin approached her carefully, aware that one wrong move could send her retreating into the emotional void her people called strength. And when he gently touched her arm, she jerked as though struck by lightning. Her bioluminescent markings, flaring with colors Vexari warriors were never meant to display. "Kyra," he whispered, "look at me." She tried to resist, to keep her eyes on the approaching threat, but when she finally met his gaze, something inside her cracked open completely, spilling memories of exile, pain, and the unbearable loneliness she had carried since the day her collective link was severed. "I am losing control," she breathed, her voice raw. "My body, my instincts, they're reacting to you. This should not be possible. Humans should not affect my cycle." Arin stepped closer, confusion and concern warring on his face. "Tell me what's happening." She swallowed hard, trembling as another surge of color rippled across her skin, her energy field humming with dangerous intensity. "The cycle convergence," she whispered, almost ashamed. "It only happens once in a warrior's lifetime, if it happens at all. A bonding instinct triggered by emotional resonance. If it begins and is not completed, my energy collapses in on itself. I will die." Arin's eyes widened, horror and disbelief flooding him. "And this is happening because of me?" She nodded once, the motion stiff with humiliation. "I tried to suppress it. I tried to ignore it. But when you touched me, when you spoke to me as if my life mattered, something inside me woke." She stepped back, as if fearing her own proximity. A Vexari has never converged with an off-species partner. It's forbidden. It's lethal. And yet my body, my mind has already chosen. Another tremor ripped through her, nearly dropping her to her knees, and Arin caught her instinctively, pulling her into his arms without hesitation. The contact ignited a burst of radiant light across her markings, her breath hitching sharply as the convergence accelerated. "You must let me go," she rasped, gripping his shirt with desperate strength. "If the hunters find me like this, they will eradicate everything within 50 kilometers. They will call me corrupted and execute you for contaminating me." But Arin shook his head fiercely, tightening his hold. "I'm not letting you die. Tell me what you need." Kyra's eyes fluttered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear, longing, and something she could no longer deny. "I cannot complete the convergence alone. I need connection, physical, emotional, a merging of intent." The words tasted like fire in her throat. "I'm giving you one chance to make love to me. Human, do it now, or it will be too late." The confession hung between them like a gravitational shift, warping the very air. Arin stared at her, breathless, stunned by the gravity of what she was asking. Not lust, not desire, but a lifeline in the most intimate form imaginable. Outside, the hunter vessel landed with a seismic thud, shadows moving across the dust as soldiers prepared their sweep. But inside the outpost time seemed to stop as Kyra trembled in his arms, her life force flickering like a dying star. Arin's heartbeat thundered in his chest, not from fear of the hunters, but from the realization that this alien warrior who had fought empires now placed her survival entirely in his hands. "Kyra," he murmured, lifting her chin so she met his gaze. "I'm not afraid of saving you." And as he kissed her slow, Deliberate, grounding, the convergence ignited fully, her light blooming around them as if the universe itself had chosen this moment to rewrite its own rules, binding two lives together, just as the boots of the enemy thundered toward the door. The convergence did not explode outward in heat or desperation the way Kyra had feared. It unfolded like a star being born inside her chest, a tidal surge of energy synchronizing with Arin's heartbeat, pulling them together in a way that transcended flesh and became something deeper, older, woven into the architecture of the universe itself. Their connection was not carnal but cosmic, a merging of wills and trust and breath. His steady grounding presence, anchoring her while her luminous biofield rose around them in shimmering waves of violet gold light. Arin held her as if she were both fragile and fierce, and Kyra clung to him with the terrified certainty of someone who had never needed another soul before this moment, yet now knew she could not survive without him. The convergence sealed with a pulse that shook dust from the outpost ceiling. Her markings stabilizing into a radiant glow proof she had completed the cycle that only ancient legends claimed still existed within the Vexari bloodline. As the last tremors faded, Kyra's legs buckled, and Arin caught her again, lowering her gently until she steadied, breathless but alive, her eyes blazing with an awakened power she could barely comprehend. "I should not exist like this," she whispered, trembling. "A Vexari bonded to a human. This breaks every law of our creation." Arin brushed his thumb across her cheek, grounding her once more. Maybe the laws were wrong. She didn't have time to respond, because at that moment the outpost's metal frame shuddered violently as the hunters breached the perimeter, their boots pounding in formation, their scanners sweeping like blades through the dust-choked air. Kyra stiffened, instinct and training rising like a storm. But when she tried to stand, her energy surged wildly, and the air around her crackled with visible arcs of light. She stared at her hands in shock. "This is impossible. The convergence has amplified my core." Arin's console flickered and went dead, overloaded by the power radiating from her. He met her wide eyes. "Can you control it?" Kyra swallowed hard. "I don't know." The door blew inward before they could speak further, and Vexari hunters poured into the outpost's sleek silver armor, expressionless visors, weapons raised with clinical precision. They hesitated only a fraction of a second when they saw Kyra glowing with enough energy to power a warship, but then their leader stepped forward and scanned her, and the reading made him recoil as though struck. "Her signature is merged," he rasped to his team. "She has completed the forbidden cycle with an off-species organism. Destroy them both." Kyra's breath hitched as she stepped instinctively in front of Arin, her new power responding before she could think. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking the front line of hunters off their feet and throwing sparks through the air. She gasped, staring at the devastation she'd caused. Arin touched her arm gently. "Kyra, you can control it. We do this together." The words steadied her more than any battle mantra ever had. She lifted her hands slowly, focusing, drawing on the bond that had formed between them only moments ago. Through it she felt Arin's steadiness, his certainty, his refusal to abandon her, not a command but a partnership, and her energy reshaped itself around that intention, settling into coherence like a star collapsing gracefully into form. The hunters advanced again, firing stun lances that disintegrated before reaching Kyra, her aura absorbing them like dust swallowed by the void. With a single step forward, she unleashed a controlled pulse not lethal, merely disabling, sending the entire squad crashing to the ground unconscious. Arin stared at her in awe, breathless. "Kyra, you just overpowered an elite unit without harming them." She blinked, shocked by her own restraint. "That's not Vexari instinct. That's—" She looked at him, realization dawning. "That's you." Outside, more ships thundered toward the outpost, dust spiraling into choking clouds as reinforcements arrived, but Kyra no longer trembled. For the first time in her existence, she was not guided by fear, duty, or obedience, but by choice. And as she turned toward the door with Arin at her side, power radiating from them like twin suns, she understood the true meaning of the convergence, not survival, but transformation. Her empire had come to erase her. Instead, it was about to witness something it believed impossible. Human and a Vexari standing as one. The reinforcements descended in a thunderous formation that shook the Martian-like soil of the frontier world. An entire Vexari suppression legion sweeping across the barren landscape with the cold precision of a machine designed only to erase. And as the sky burned with their arrival, Arin and Kyra emerged from the battered outpost, two figures, silhouetted against a horizon filled with warships, one human. One Vexari, bound together by a convergence that should not have been possible, radiating a quiet defiance far more potent than any weapon. The soldiers formed a wide perimeter, weapons humming with charged plasma, and at their center stepped the Vexari High Inquisitor, clad in obsidian armor engraved with symbols older than most civilizations. When he lifted his scanning gauntlet toward Kyra, its display flickered violently, overwhelmed by readings that made even the hardened soldiers falter. "Abomination," the Inquisitor thundered, his voice echoing with augmented resonance. "You have committed the forbidden cycle with an inferior organism. You have tainted the Dominion's purity. By decree of the Eternal Codex, both you and the human are to be eliminated." Kyra straightened, energy rising beneath her skin like a solar flare waiting to erupt. But Arin placed a hand on her, backsteading her, grounding her, and a wave of synchronized calm pulsed through their bond, transforming her chaotic surge into controlled power. "You're wrong," she called out, her voice carrying across the battleground, not with fear, but with the authority of someone who had finally found her truth. "The convergence is not corruption. It is restoration." Her words sent a ripple of confusion through the ranks, murmurs passing between soldiers who had never heard such defiance from one of their own. But the Inquisitor snarled, slamming the butt of his staff into the ground. A holographic sigil burst upward, a seal of execution. "The convergence was purged from our species millennia ago," he spat. "It led to chaos, betrayal, civil war. So we carved emotion out of our bloodlines and replaced it with obedience. And now you have revived the flaw that nearly destroyed us." Kyra felt the weight of his words strike a familiar wound, the story she had always been taught. The shame burned into every warrior's training, but her markings flared brighter. Infused with the truth she had discovered through Arin, "Your history is incomplete," she said. "The convergence did not destroy us. It made us stronger. The Dominion feared what bonded warriors could become, so they rewrote the past. The flaw you speak of was the one thing that made us whole." The Inquisitor hesitated, just for a heartbeat, as if an old memory flickered behind his eyes, but he quickly masked it with rage. "Lies. You are a genetic mistake, and he pointed at Arin, is pollution." He raised his staff, signaling the Legion to fire. Plasma rifles crackled to life, the air trembling as hundreds of barrels aligned. Arin tightened his grip on Kyra's hand, and she felt his determination rush through their bond steady, unwavering, fearless, in a way no Vexari commander had ever been taught to be. When the Legion fired, Kyra stepped forward, energy bursting from her in a radiant sphere that swallowed the bolts mid-her, dissolving them into harmless fragments of light. Gasps rose from the ranks, shock, disbelief, awe as Kyra absorbed every shot without strain. But the true revelation came when Arin raised his free hand, and the air itself bent around him. The convergence had altered him too, enhancing his neurological pathways, amplifying his reflexes, awakening abilities previously dormant in human potential. "Impossible," the Inquisitor whispered, stumbling back as he scanned Arin and saw readings that defied every biological law. A human cannot adapt to Vexari energy. He should be dead. Arin exhaled, the air shimmering faintly around him, his voice steady. Maybe humans were never as weak as your Dominion believed. Kyra felt pride swell inside her, pride and something deeper love. Unmistakable and fierce, as the Inquisitor roared for one final assault, ordering every soldier to advance. But none did. The Legion stood frozen, shaken by the sight of what Kyra and Arin had become. In them, the soldiers saw not abomination, but evolution, the return of a power their rulers had stolen. One soldier dropped to his knees. Then another, and another. The Inquisitor screamed in fury, charging forward with his staff raised, but Kyra stepped into his path, her aura blazing. With a single gesture she disarmed him, the staff dissolving in her energy field, and she met his gaze with unflinching resolve. The era of obedience ends today. The Inquisitor fell, defeated not by violence, but by the truth his empire had tried to bury. As the Legion bowed their heads, acknowledging Kyra as the reborn convergence bearer, Arin wrapped an arm around her, grounding her once more as her energy settled into a serene glow. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Kyra turned toward the rising dawn, her markings shimmering with purpose. "We rebuild the Vexari, not with fear, but with connection." She took his hand, fingers lacing with his. "And you, human you, stand with me." Arin smiled, a warmth spreading in his chest that felt like the universe finally exhaling. All together they looked toward the horizon, where a new future waited, one forged not by war, but by the impossible bond that had rewritten the fate of an empire.